Story time about how I accidentally discovered an online shrine of myself. When I was 18, I attended university and lived on campus. I made a few groups of friends to hang out with, including a new girlfriend. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. One girl named Lily asked me if I wanted to eat lunch with her after class, and I agreed. Over the next few weeks, this started becoming a pattern and I didn't exactly know how to say no. One day in that same class, someone asked if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily and I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore. Later that day, I saw that Lily had sent me a friend request. We had no friends in common and I had no clue how she knew my last name, but I accepted it. She'd message me constantly and comment on anything I posted. Other than lunch, after class, and social media, we barely spent time together in person. She also made it clear that she didn't like my girlfriend, who was also coincidentally named Lily. She'd always make remarks about how she's the better Lily. On the last day of class, she asked me to go for a walk in the woods afterwards for lunch. While we were out there sitting on a log, she kissed me without warning. I got out of there as fast as I could and I was happy I wouldn't see her for a while. However, she kept messaging me. Part 2 of how I accidentally discovered an online shrine of myself. Over the summer, I broke up with my girlfriend. When I came back to university, I started dating a boy. Lily wasn't pleased to hear this news. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. When I was scrolling one day, I noticed something odd on a blog I followed. I saw someone receive an ask with phrases that I recognized. I realized it was taken from my About page. This made me freeze. The person was asking this random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on what type of person would write it. I went to the person's blog and I was shaken to my core. I could tell it was Lily's even though it didn't have her name or pictures on it. The content was primarily about me. There are accounts of things I'd recently done, references to things as far back as I'd known her, and basically twisted every platonic encounter we had to a romanticized version. She had gathered every scrap of information about me online and offline and posted it on this blog like a diary. There were also numerous posts attacking my boyfriend. She made up a whole fantasy world with all this information. However, it gets worse. Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and our relationship. Her followers were invested in this fake fanfiction version of my life. After seeing all this, I confronted Lily. Part 3 of how I accidentally discovered an online shrine of myself. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing. She didn't even address it, just changed the subject even after I pushed for answers. After this, she deleted the page or changed the name because I never found it again. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we still had classes and I was afraid of what she'd do next. She made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time I pulled away from her and she started rumors about me and damaged a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I let her stay in my life but just ignored her. After graduation, Lily wanted me to spend time with her, but I knew I was done. I made excuses all the time and stopped posting on socials that she knew about. She didn't give up though. She somehow tracked me and messaged me occasionally referencing things that I mentioned online somewhere that she shouldn't have known about. The last conversation we had is when she messaged me out of the blue after months of not talking. She asked about how I knew I was queer and I told her basic stuff. She quickly changed the subject about how she wanted to be a boy for me and became fetishistic. It freaked me out and I stopped all contact after this. Later, I slowly deleted her from my inactive socials. I really thought that she might finally move on. However, a few days ago she sent me a friend request. It's been 12 years since I first met her. I'm not accepting it. This is why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I was 15 and getting into my junior year, I created a Twitter account. I didn't tell anyone my username, including my family or friends. I also didn't upload any pictures or specify my exact location, and I put a different city than where I lived. I had around 30 followers and I didn't follow many people. One evening in October, someone sent me a weird direct message. They had 200 followers and the message read, "Hi, I'm Robin. I just turned 17. I wanted to know if you lived in the city because I'm moving there and I'm going to that high school soon. I'd like to make some new friends." I immediately thought something was wrong because nowhere in my profile did I list my actual town, but I remembered a tweet I made a few weeks ago about buses in which I mentioned my city. I was bored and he was polite, so we started talking. The discussion was mainly about high school teachers and cafeteria food. As it got later in the night, he started asking more personal questions like if I lived far from the school or if I was ever home alone. I never answered these questions because it was too shady for me. The next day we talked again and started bonding. I developed feelings for him over the next few weeks. He was handsome and super kind, which was everything I needed after being bullied for so many years. We had a 2-week vacation in October and at the end of it is when he finally told me that he would be attending my high school. I was so excited to finally meet him. Part 2 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. He asked to pick a place to meet during the morning break on our first day back to school after break. I was so happy to meet him and told him to join me in the hall. However, when he realized people would be around, he said he'd rather meet me in an isolated place because he might not recognize me in a crowd. It was a good enough excuse for me and I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, it seemed a little creepy, but since we were in school, I was confident that nothing bad could happen. I dressed up and made myself really pretty and counted down the minutes till we met. When he arrived, it was him. He wasn't a catfish, but he looked a little older than 17. We talked and got along so well, and at the end of it, he asked me to go to lunch with him. I refused because I didn't have money and wouldn't let anyone pay for me. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after class. I told him I have to take the bus, but he could walk me there. This became a routine for another 2 months. One day, I complained about how lonely I'd be at home as everyone in my family was going to be out that day. I know it was reckless, but I thought I could trust him by this point. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. I waved goodbye and put my headphones in. Little did I know that my life was in danger. Part 3 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I got off, I had a weird gut feeling that someone was watching me. Since it was December, it was already dark by the time that I had gotten off the bus. I paused my music but kept my earphones in not to draw suspicion. It was silent in my suburban neighborhood, especially at night. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew someone was following me. As quietly as possible, I reached for my keys in my pocket. As soon as I pulled them out, I ran. It was the best and fastest sprint of my life. I somehow managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I deactivated the alarm and looked through the glass panel on the door. It wasn't a peephole but a whole window, so if someone wanted to see inside the house, they could. Standing there looking at me with the creepiest face was Rob. He followed me home, probably with a car, and I was paralyzed. We stared at each other for a minute before I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. When I got back to the door, he was still there and started banging. I feared the glass would break, but it didn't. After 5 minutes, he stopped and went around the house banging on every shutter until he came back to the door. He looked angry, but my neighbor's car pulled in and he ran off, probably thinking it was my family. After this, he harassed me online, which finally made me delete my Twitter. No one even knew or heard of him, which is probably why he looked older. I never heard of him again, but I still wonder what could have happened that night. Story time about how I was saved by a stranger. I'm a petite girl, and because of this, I avoid confrontation whenever I can. I'm pretty good at it because I've always had a strong sixth sense thing going on. I try my best to avoid people who make me anxious, and it's allowed me to survive some very dangerous situations. I live in West France and went to visit a close friend. She had broken her leg, so I decided to go and cheer her up with some gifts. The atmosphere was so nice that I didn't notice when it got dark outside. Despite how late it was, I decided to go home. I was 40 minutes from home, but I walked this distance many times without problems and thought it would be fine. However, I was wrong. Less than 5 minutes later, I had a strong feeling that something terrible was going to happen. As I approached one of the bridges in the city, I didn't see anyone around. I thought my senses were playing tricks on me and kept going. About 20 meters from the bridge, I heard a conversation and a giggle. When I turned my head, I saw 3 men walking towards me. I felt a cold sweat run down my back, but I didn't want to show them that I was afraid, so I kept going. They were still talking as they followed me, but I didn't know what they were saying because they were speaking a different language. When I reached the bridge, they had caught up with me and surrounded me. I pushed forward and one of them leaned over to me, whispering something into my ear followed by a laugh. I was terrified. Part 2 of how I was saved by a stranger. The 3 men were 6 feet tall and surrounding me as I walked on the bridge. They started making animal noises, howling, growling, whistling, and kissing the air loudly. They did all of this extremely close to my face. I had nowhere to escape to because I was on the bridge and would kill myself if I jumped into the water. The 2 minutes across the bridge felt like an eternity to me. When we got to the end of the bridge, I was sweaty, close to tears, and felt like puking. I was shaking, which only amused them more. That's when a miracle happened. Someone loudly called my name. I looked up to see a tall, older man approaching us. I had no idea who he was or how he knew my name, but it didn't matter because I felt like he was my guardian angel. He was staring furiously at the strangers and they fell silent. He asked them what they were doing to his girlfriend, then stretched out his hand to me, never taking his eyes off of them. I grabbed his hand and nestled his shoulder. My heart was beating fast and loud, but I was so thankful. I thought the 3 men would attack him, but they didn't. I almost heard their teeth grinding as they muttered something. Shortly after, I broke down in tears. He walked me home and told me he was walking near the bridge when he saw everything go down. I asked him how he knew my name and he looked surprised, then smiled. He said he didn't and he just picked a popular name. He dropped me off and we parted ways, but I'll always be thankful to him. This is why you never truly know someone. When I was 10 years old, I met my best friend. We were pretty much inseparable. All throughout school, we were always by each other's side. Our last names both started with J, so we had almost every class together. He was a smart kid and a model student. However, his home life wasn't the best. He also had ADHD and was bipolar. My family was like a second family to him. As we grew into adults, our views differed on what we wanted to do with our lives. He had his first child when he was 18 and split up with the child's mom, so the thought of college never sat well with him. He worked a 9-to-5 job instead to support himself. By 21, he met another woman and had a child with her. This time he was doing good. He stayed with her and was taking care of both of his children. I was really proud of him for stepping up and getting his life together. Suddenly, something inside him flipped like a switch. He randomly up and left that woman and moved to another state. I hadn't spoken to him for 2 months after he did this. One late night, I was woken up by a phone call from his mother saying that he was in jail. I asked what for and she told me that he raped a 15-year-old girl. He was caught and sent to jail. He was serving 2 years behind bars only because there were texts from that girl saying that she was 18 years old. 2.5 years went by when he finally got out. I told him he could stay with me until he was back on his feet, but he refused. Then things took a dark turn. Part 2 of why you truly never know someone. He decided to stay with my mom for a month instead. Every day I would message and check up on him. I would always get the same big answer saying that he's good and thanking us for helping him out. One day, my mom called me in a panicked state. She told me that he was in his room with a knife and threatening to unalive himself. I immediately drove over and talked him down, taking the knife away from him. Later that night, I called to check up on him because I was worried. He didn't answer. I called my mom to check on him and she said that he was in his room. I asked her to go check and when she did, he was nowhere to be found. Later, we found out where he had gone that night. Apparently, he walked over to his ex-girlfriend's house to spy on her and her boyfriend. I'm not sure what shifted in him, but he walked behind the house and ripped off a piece of his shirt. He stuffed the ripped shirt in a crack of the window and set the fabric on fire. Then he just walked away. He attempted to kill his child, ex-girlfriend, and an unknown man. Luckily, no one was harmed because the adults in the house were still awake and smelled the fire. They quickly got the children to safety and called the fire department. My best friend admitted to this and has since been in jail. After this, I stopped all contact. It's been 9 years. It's crazy to think that the closest person to you can have a deep dark side and there's nothing you can do about it. Story time about my scariest experience being home alone. When I was 14, I lived with my grandparents. They lived in an old bungalow type of house. It was one story and we had stairs that went right up to the attic. No one ever used the attic and it was just used to store things. My room door was near the stairs leading up to the attic, which I hated because I always got scared something would crawl down when I left my room. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport. They wouldn't be back until early morning. I told them that I'd be safe at home overnight. We lived in a gated community with guard dogs and I thought everything would be okay. Before they left, we had an early dinner and I was stuck doing the dishes. While I was doing this, I could hear the neighboring dogs barking a lot, but I didn't think much of it because they always did that. After cleaning, I locked every window, shut off the lights, and headed to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were on and everything looked completely normal. I had barred and tinted windows because my grandparents didn't want anyone peeping in my room since it was a one-story house. They were barred because when my uncle was younger, he'd always sneak out, so they put bars on the window to prevent him from doing that. When I turned off the lights to go to bed, I saw a silhouette of a man illuminated by the streetlights standing outside of my window. I thought I was hallucinating. When I turned on the lights, he was gone. When I turned them off, he was there. Part 2 of my scariest experience when I was home alone. When I turned the lights on and off the third time, the man's figure wasn't there either time. I sighed in relief and thought my mind was just playing tricks on me or that something was casting a shadow. I double locked my door to be safe with one on the doorknob and one of those latch had locks. I tucked myself in bed and tried to fall asleep even though the dogs were still barking outside. When I was finally falling asleep, I heard something above me moving, something in the attic. I pushed the thought down and hugged my pillow, telling myself it was just rats. My heart sank when I heard someone hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with a blanket and waited, wishing my grandparents had given me a phone for a time like this. Suddenly, I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click followed by a quiet turn of the knob. It turned, but it didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push it. I finally stood up and softly pushed my body against the door, locking everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound. I don't know why they stopped, but they did. Then I heard footsteps go up the stairs as I sat there. I saw something move in the corner of my eye, and there outside of my window was the shadow. I forced my eyes closed and ignored it until I fell asleep. All I remember is the next day I was having breakfast with my family. I brought it up to my grandparents, but they scoffed that it was probably rats. I never brought it up again, but the attic window had been opened.